pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you, Sangam Talks, for hosting me again. So, for the last 14 or 15 days, there has been a huge controversy around what the BJP spokesperson, Nupur Sharma, said on a televised debate. Right. So, not many people have seen the content because most of the media houses pulled it down within a day, but some of you might have seen it. So, let me start with just presenting a quick summary of what was stated and how and why it snowballed into a controversy. So, to start with, on the 26th of May, there was a televised debate on the Gyanvapi issue. And there were some Muslim spokespersons, and there was also Nupur Sharma from the BJP. So during the debate, the Muslim spokesperson made some comments about the Shivalinga, which most of the Hindus would have taken it to be an insulting comment. Okay, so because he kept referring to it as the fountain. Okay, so and a lot of people felt insulted for the simple reason, there is a little bit of history to go with this. You know, when Aurangzeb was the Mughal emperor around 1668, 1669, he issued an edict. Okay, so he issued a firman to demolish the temple at Gyanvapi. So that was the Kashi Vishwanatha temple, and then to build a mosque on top of that. So even today, this doesn't even require an expert archaeologist to come back and tell you that this is what happened, because all Aurangzeb did was to demolish the Gopuram of the temple, okay, and then built a dome to turn it into a mosque. So apart from that, even the outer walls of the uh, what is mosque today, it is having sculptures which are distinctly and unmistakably Hindu. Okay? So it started that way, and then what happened was the Gyanvapi, where they had, it's called the well of knowledge, right? That's literally what it means. And then in Gyanvapi, it's been turned into what they call Wazu Khana. Okay, among the Muslims, before they enter the mosque, they will go and then they perform ablutions, which is they'll wash their feet, they will wash their hands, everything before they enter the mosque for offering their prayers. So for Hindus, this is a very degrading thing because there is a, a Shivalinga which has been unearthed, which is being disputed, but I think all the indications are it is a Shivalinga. And then one of the archaeologists from the Archaeological Survey of India also pointed out that this Shivalinga could go back to the Gupta era, okay, which is around 4th, 5th century CE. So it's a pretty old Shivalinga that had been installed there. But regardless, for the Hindus, at the end of the day, every religion boils down to beliefs. Okay, so what we consider sacred or what the practitioners of other religions consider sacred, it all boils down to a matter of belief. So for Hindus, this is the Shivalinga, one of their most sacred icons. And then this was not only demolished, and then the temple was demolished and to humiliate the Hindus, and a mosque built on top of that. But also on a daily basis, Muslims are going and washing their feet. And then on top of that, when somebody sarcastically calls it a fountain, I can understand why the Hindu spokesperson would have got agitated over that. Okay, and then responded the way Nupur Sharma did. Okay, so what did she actually say, and what is the what makes it really controversial? Is it factual? That's the first question we should be asking, right? So Nupur Sharma made three observations. Okay, I'm just paraphrasing. The first one, she said, well, for all of that, the preamble was she said, look, you are mocking Shivalinga, so I can also mock your religious beliefs. I can also quote the Quran, the Hadiths, and other things and mock your belief. For example, your Quran says the earth is flat. That was the first observation she made. The second observation she made was uh, your Hadiths, they talk about Prophet Muhammad uh, traveling. It's called Miraj in Islam. They travels on a horseback or the back of a mule. Uh, Overnight to heaven and he returns. Okay, so the entire myth of flying horse, I can also mock that. Okay, and then would you like me to do that? And then she goes on to make the third observation, which I think is really what uh, agitated the protesters. Okay, so the third observation was she said Prophet Muhammad, who was 53 or 54, married a 6-year-old Aisha and then consummated the marriage with her when she was just 9 years old. Okay, and this is already stated in the hadiths. This is well known in the Islamic tradition. Okay, and um, while I'm guessing, so I think it's very reasonable to say that this is the comment that got most of the people agitated. However, the important thing to remember is that every media that covered the issue did not reproduce the comments that were made by Nupur Sharma. All they said was she made a controversial comment that insulted Prophet Muhammad. Okay, and if we just rewind and go back the last few years, Charlie Hebdo controversy or the Danish cartoon controversy, everything, in all of those cases, the same modus operandi was followed. Uh, Nobody will know, none of the protesters will know what exactly were the offensive contents. Okay, what is so offensive about the cartoon that we are all protesting like this and we are all indulging in violence? Okay, very few people would know of that. Instead, there will be a large body of mullahs and others who will go out and then who will instigate the masses saying that the prophet has been insulted and we have now stand up for his honor. So people then don't ask a question and they come out and they start protesting. And this is not something new. This has been going on for uh, literally 100 1200 1300 years since Islam came into existence. So this is the one you are seeing on screen, is from Muhammad ibn al-Razi. Okay, al-Razi was a very famous philosopher who lived in the 9th century, and this is what he observes. Okay, he says every time Islam is challenged, Muslims or Islamists in this case, they respond with anger and violence and they go and spill blood and they kill anyone who is bringing up a rational inquiry. And this has been a problem with Islam. This is what he observes way back in the 9th century. He was a very famous philosopher and one of the brightest minds early Islam produced, where he was writing the history of medicine and translating a lot of texts, everything. And this is what he observed. And very little has changed 12 years down the line because uh, often what we notice is all it takes is for a small number of propagandists to launch a campaign saying that the prophet's honor has been insulted, and then the Muslims have to protest or even indulge in violence. And then large bodies of Muslims respond. By this, I'm not saying that all Muslims do that. I do think most of the Muslims may not even have any clue about the issues and may be totally indifferent to the issue, like the majority of Hindus are. But there is a substantial body which is willing to come out and riot, and that should be a matter of concern for us. Okay? So now, uh, the comment that would have got everyone agitated is, while the other two comments can be interpreted, either as, hey, this is a little bit nebulous. We do not know the Quran says the earth is flat. There are some Muslim apologists who are trying to deny that. And similarly, the Miraj, where Muhammad goes on a mule overnight, can be again explained away as something symbolic. Okay, I'm not saying those things are symbolic. Those were literal when the hadiths were written. They were intended to be believed as literal facts, but I also know that there are Muslim apologists who try to explain away. Okay. However, the most embarrassing one is the episode of Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old girl. Okay. So, and then consummating a marriage when she was just 9 years old. Okay. So this is something which disturbs most people. Okay. And this is something an Islamist would not want to be publicly discussed. But the first question we should ask is what Nupur Sharma said true? Okay, so Yasir Qadhi is an imam. He's a Pakistani American imam and one of the very, very conservative Muslim clerics, okay, and a scholar and a highly respected one at that. What he says about this same uh, controversy, okay, at what age did Muhammad marry Aisha? Yasir Qadhi, he is confirming the standard Islamic position as to the age of marriage of Aisha and the age at which the marriage was consummated, which was exactly as Nupur Sharma said. And so whatever she stated was very factual. So why does it then become controversial? I mentioned the reason, but even more importantly, if you look at the trend, right, like the BBC wrote an article and then they start the article by mentioning that they are not going to repeat what Nupur Sharma said because it was highly offensive. Okay, so it is no more offensive than what Muslim clerics themselves have been preaching, and it is exactly what they said. But it could be the tone which came across as offensive. But the modus operandi we are seeing is that whether it is BBC, whether it's the Western media or the Islamists, they don't mention anything about the content of her speech, and instead they instigate the rioters by telling that Prophet Muhammad has been insulted and hence they should fight for his honor. Okay, and this is something which Arif Muhammad Khan calls street power, which they repeatedly exercise. And then this is something society has to deal with uh, only by a legal application of force, because you cannot yield to street power. The more and more you yield to that, the sooner you will be losing civilization, sooner you will be losing all kinds of freedom. Okay. However, is there something for which Nupur Sharma can be criticized? I think she can be. Okay. And I'm not saying that there is anything wrong in what she said, but then she also came representing the BJP. Okay, so BJP is not just any political party; it's a national party, and it's the ruling party. And then this is the party which is probably going to rule India for several more years to come and affect very important changes. That means, as spokesperson, she is not just representing Hindus; she is representing all Indians. Okay, regardless of whether they may have voted for the BJP or not. Okay, so that being the case, it's very important that she doesn't come across as someone who is not having gravitas. Okay, so for a spokesperson, the gravitas is very important. Okay, she could have very well handled the situation differently by uh, pointing out that the mullah who's calling it a fountain is actually a hate monger, and then hence appeal to better sensibilities and taken the moral high ground, which she did not. Okay, and I think that is something which any spokesperson should watch for in the future, because you are overall representing the party, and that gives an easy excuse for someone to target you based on that. But apart from that, there's nothing wrong in any of the contents she mentioned. Okay, so then where is really the problem? The real problem is with sections 295 and 153A of the Indian Penal Code. Okay, so every time an offense is caused to somebody's religious beliefs or sentiments, okay, you can be arrested. Okay, and then you can be treated as a criminal. Ideally, what should happen is the right to blaspheme should be part and parcel of free speech. Okay, so I should be free to say anything blasphemous. Okay, so long as I'm not instigating violence, I should not be targeted. And only those who are calling for disruptive protests and those who are calling for violence, they should be punished by the law. Unfortunately, these two sections of the Indian Penal Code, which were legacies of British colonial era, they are causing problems for Hindus, because anytime a Hindu goes and criticizes or even quotes something from the Quran or the Hadiths, he can be accused of hurting somebody's religious sentiments. Okay, and so this is something, in the longer term, Hindus have to work with the BJP to scrap these laws, so that the right to blaspheme should be part of free speech. Nobody can be targeted for that, and rather those who are calling for violence, which happened in the case of Nupur Sharma. There were calls to murder her. There was a bounty of 50 lakhs placed from Pakistan, and another, AIMIM Inquila placed a bounty of 1 crore rupees on her head, and calls to rape, etc. And those are the ones who should be punished. So this is about the Nupur Sharma controversy part of the episode. Now, coming to Gyan Vapi. Okay, so Gyan Vapi, and what we are seeing is this the only temple that was demolished? The answer is no. Okay, and for example, um, the actual count of the temples that were razed by the Muslim rulers is yet to be finalized, but the numbers vary significantly. As many as 40,000 temples might have been razed, but Sitaram Goyal tabulated a partial list of 1800 temples, okay, based on the chronicles written by the Muslim writers themselves. They were the contemporary accounts. He summarized 1800 of those. Okay, regardless, we are looking at a very significantly large number of temples that were desecrated, that were demolished, and mosques built on top of them. So, what should be the right approach? Let's start with the Gyanvapi temple, and then the mosque that stands right over that spot. Okay, so there is a really good book which most of you should consult. It's by Professor V.S. Bhatnagar. It's the title of the book is Emperor Aurangzeb and Destruction of Temples. All he has done is he has summarized all the court chronicles and the edicts that were issued by Aurangzeb himself. And Aurangzeb in 1668 or 9, he orders the demolition of the temple, the Kashi Vishwanath temple. Okay, so this is a first-hand account. It was an edict that was issued, and then the temple was raised right after that. And then it took years after that, centuries after that, for even a partial reconstruction of the temple. So the temple itself uh, was raised by Aurangzeb, and there is very little doubt as to that happening. And then second one, this picture was taken sometime in sometime in 1868 or something. This is called Gyanvapi, okay, the well of knowledge. This was taken by uh, uh, British photographer Samuel Bourne. He took a lot of pictures. He took some of the pictures in Kangra region, but only at the major temple town where he took pictures where was Kashi, Varanasi, and then he was very meticulous. And this is a subject where I have a lot of personal interest too, because I shoot film. Okay, so this one follows an old technique called albumen. In this, the negative is on a glass plate, and then what they take is they take a cloth and then they treat it with the egg yolk, and then they generate print on top of it. So, so this was a picture here taken of the Gyanvapi sometime in 1868, and after that, at present, many of these icons, everything are no longer there, which opens up the possibility that the defacing of the um, walls of the mosque of Gyanvapi may have gone on even in the last 100 years. Okay, so but this is something which has to be determined, and I think the photograph itself is authentic because it was well annotated by the photographer, and it is put up on display at Sotheby's. Okay, Sotheby's is a big auction place, and then they do a lot of uh, checking on the provenance of the photograph or anything they put up on auction. So in this case, I think the provenance is pretty clear. Okay, so in this case, I think that is an important appeal I would like to make to Muslims. Okay, not just to Hindus, right? So, and look at it this way. When you look at a church or a mosque, okay, those are not sacred places to Christians and Muslims respectively. Those are the places where they congregate, where they pray, where they may listen to sermon. Okay, and maybe one or two places like Kaaba may be sacred to Muslims, okay, and then some of the temples, some of the churches where the nativity stories of Christianity are associated, they may be a little bit sacred to Christians, but then the sanctity of the place of worship is very, very different in Hinduism. Okay, so for Christians or Muslims, the locale does not matter. Okay, whereas for Hindus, the locale matters. Okay, when that's the reason every one of the temples you have a Sthala Purana. Okay? And then, for example, if you take Krishna, okay, there are temples for Krishna all over the place. It could be in Mathura, it could be in um, Guruvayur, it could be in any other place. But the bottom line is, for Hindus, each one of them, there is Sthala Purana, there are Leelas of Krishna that are enacted locally, and then everything takes a very local specific meaning and sanctity to go with it. So this is why for Hindus, a temple is very important. And there is an excellent book by Professor Meenakshi Jain. It's called Flight of Deities. She talks about many temples that were raised, but she starts with the ones in today's Pakistan, some of the temples in today's Pakistan, and she talks about how even after the royal patronage ended, even after the temples were raised by the Muslim conquerors, how the local Hindu community time and again uh, did everything to rebuild that temple and to start the worship once again. So this is because the locale is sacred for Hindus. Okay, it's not as if, look, you demolish this temple, let me go and build another temple elsewhere. It doesn't work that way. Okay, and this is why for us the rivers are sacred. This is why forests, the vana, the mountains, they are all sacred. In many of the mountains, not only the local tribes, but even other Hindus from other parts of India won't set their foot on top of the mountain, and rather sometimes they will do what's called anga pradakshina. Okay, so they will just roll on top, roll all through the pilgrim route. So for Hindus, it is not, first of all, today's Muslims cannot be held guilty for the intolerance shown by the Muslim emperors, whether it is Mughals, whether it is other sultans, for their acts of intolerance, we cannot hold today's Muslims responsible. Okay? And this statement has a converse too. Okay, the converse is today's Muslims don't have to treat the legacy of the Mughals or other Muslim conquerors as their own legacy. Okay? Because the Sanskriti of Hindus and Muslims is the same. It's the Hindu Sanskriti. So they don't have to own up for the crimes committed by the Mughal emperors. In other words, they don't have to defend it. So here is a very simple proposal, right? So this was actually proposed by Maulana Wahiduddin Khan during the Ayodhya controversy. He said, Muslims should come forward and hand the temple over to the Hindus. Okay, that will generate goodwill. Okay, and I am going to close with this appeal. Why not a section of right-thinking Muslims come forward and say, uh, thousands of temples were raised. However, here is what we as Muslim community will do. We'll come back and offer 108 of those disputed sites, okay, where uh, temples were raised and mosques built on top of that, so that Hindus can go back and rebuild their temples, okay, and then relocate the mosque to another location. Okay, so which is not a problem for Muslims, okay, because it's not the locale that matters, and as a gesture of goodwill, you build a mosque nearby. Then what will really happen is it is not the count. It's not the 108 temples that are being, revived. Okay. It's not the Muslims coming up with a certain count. Okay. However, what is more important is today, the only conversation that happens is Muslims either deny that a mosque was built after raising a temple. And second, sometimes there are very insensitive comments like what happened on the debate where they will keep referring to the Shivalinga as a fountain in a very sarcastic manner. Okay, and then in many of the places that were converted into mosques, they will go and then they will perform ablutions like washing their feet, etc. Okay, on uh, uh, icons that were very sacred to Hindus, that are sacred to Hindus. Okay, so what this will change is this will change something very substantially and very fundamentally. Okay, instead of Muslims defending those actions, they'll come back and say, look, uh, we cannot change the past history, but these things happen. Okay, so and then we will give back 108 of these disputed sites to Hindus, so you can rebuild the temple, and then you help relocate the mosque to a different site. I think this problem can very well be solved. Okay, with that, and in doing so, if we take such an initiative, I believe we will also start bringing out a section of uh, Muslim community, which could be only nominal Muslims and those who are not hardcore Salafis or Wahhabis, and also those who are ex-Muslims and others. Their voice will find a place in the discourse. But more importantly, the extreme radicals, the Islamists, and then the leftists won't be able to hijack this conversation, communalize it, and every time indulge in the denial game to just prolong the problem. Okay, that would be my suggestion. And with that, I will pause. Happy to take any questions.
So Poonamji says that no one is mentioning the content and tone of the Muslims when they have been seriously abusing Ram, Sita, Mata Kaushalya, Durga, Brahma, Saraswati, Ganesh, you name it. I mean, so
Absolutely. In fact, it's not only that, right? And what is the Islamic Shahada, which every Muslim should recite? Okay. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his final prophet, seal of the prophet, right? And what does it mean? It means it's a denial and rejection of all Hindu divinities, Shiva, Vishnu, Krishna, Kartikeya, everyone, right? It's a complete denial of all the Hindu gods. So, and if you look at it, Islam is not teaching anything about Allah. Okay. It doesn't say, hey, this is Allah, you go and worship him. In fact, it starts with the proclamation that you reject and deny the divinity of all Hindu gods. That's number one. And then number two, Muhammad is his final prophet, okay, which means all the other Hindu sages who came afterwards, Ramanujacharya, okay, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then you have Guru Nanak and others, okay, then you have numerous others, Narayana Guru and many others who appeared in the last century, Swami Vivekananda, and then Ramana Maharishi, you have to reject all of them. Okay, this is exactly what the Muslims are doing. So should we feel offended? Okay. So I think we should feel offended, and then, but we cannot react violently. I think for all of these things, the best thing is to exercise free speech and tell them why Islam is at error. Okay, and then mock Islam. Okay, for being an intolerant religion. Okay, and then I think that's what we should be doing. But then the point that was made by Poonamji is absolutely correct, and we focus on the comments they make about Sita Ma or about Kali Ma and others. But even more fundamentally, right, the Shahada itself is one of heaping insult on Hindu divinities.
Thank you, Venkarji. But the question here is that nobody reacted violently. I mean, as I said, that we don't have to react
Correct.
violently. But
Right.
Nupur Sharma just stated as it is. And when you say that BJP as a party, I mean, I'm just playing a devil's advocate. BJP as a party is not supposed to respond back, and we should try to get those blasphemy laws out and everything. That's a long process, which we are trying to do since a long time. So the question
Right.
here is that why this authority to these other parties to keep abusing and saying whatever they feel? I mean, calling for death threats, and also, all these different things that they keep saying all the time, which I mean, the Hindus don't file any 295 or blasphemy kind of, that doesn't apply. But still, there's no
Right.
FIRs law against these people. So how does this all work? I mean, how long can you keep listening to this?
No, we should not be listening, right? So that's why the first one, right? If we don't get rid of 295 and 153, okay, it is going to hurt Hindus really bad. Okay, so that's why I don't think it's impossible to do this, and I think these two can be got rid of. Sai Deepak has been talking a lot about that over the last few months, and I think it is doable. We should do, but the question you are raising is very very valid, right? So when others are insulting Hinduism or insulting Hindu gods, nobody even bothers. Okay, there is no FIR filed. Nobody is arrested, and and the Hindus are obviously not calling for violence. Okay, some Hindus may feel hurt. They may express their hurt by exercising free speech, but nobody is reacting violently. And that's why I think in these cases we need one comprehensive law that legitimizes blasphemy. I'm absolutely at freedom to blaspheme everything. Okay, regardless of the religion, and only those who are issuing a call for violence or call for protest and other things, that should be criminalized, and those people should be arrested and thrown behind the bars. But however, coming to this particular episode, I think a large number of Islamists who have been making this kind of statement have been arrested, right? Like, for example, 3 or 4 days ago, UP police was sent by Yogi Adityanath to Tamil Nadu, okay, where they went and they arrested an Islamist who had given a death threat to Nupur Sharma. And in fact, in less than 24 hours, the police traveled from UP to Tamil Nadu, arrested this person, took him back. Okay, so I think on this occasion, what the government has done is to crack down on a large number of Islamists and book them and arrest them, etc. So I think from a tit for tat perspective, I think it is fine. But in the longer term, I would like to have blasphemy as a fundamental right of free speech.
Thank you, Venkarji. And the next question is, as you mentioned, that the Muslims cannot be blamed for what the Mughals did or whatever. But if they support it or they, are proud of what they did, then that's a problem which is there. So, what is this whole mentality that these Muslims, they continue to abuse without any shame or apology, or keep attacking Hindus? What exactly is this mentality?
Uh, that's why I was showing that slide of Al Razi, right, from 9th century. And see, this is uh, there are two types of religions, right? There are certain religions, uh, especially Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and all of these Eastern religions, for lack of better word. They don't have dogmas. Okay, so then they are very open to interpretation. Okay, they are very open to philosophical discourse. You have different siddhanta, and they are very open to challenge. Okay, even if you look at something like the Bhagavad Gita, the first few chapters are Krishna is not giving dictates for Arjuna to follow, but Arjuna is raising a lot of questions and Krishna is forced to respond back, okay, and give explanations, okay. Islam, on the other hand, is a very dogmatic religion. okay, and it makes a set of proclamations, and then you have to accept those. You cannot challenge those, and this has been the uh, reality from the very beginning. That's why Al-Razi talks about the moment it is challenged, it can be called as an insult to religion, insult to Prophet Muhammad, and then activates a section of Islamists to go out and protest. But then nobody speaks up because the entire notion of critiquing, okay, internal critique is completely lacking in Islam. Okay, so this is a very fundamental problem. Okay, it's a religion that would have been anachronistic even in the 7th or 8th centuries. Okay, and today it definitely is. Okay, and this is something. There's only one way to deal with it. Okay, so with these kind of problems, the more concessions you make, you will be reinforcing and strengthening the hands of the Islamists, right? Who are writing on the street, who are displaying street power. So the only way out is, uh, look, free speech is everybody's fundamental right. Okay, so you may hold Islam sacred, you may hold all of these narratives sacred, others need not, and others can mock, and others can make fun of it, others can ridicule it, or others can very seriously critique it. It's their choice, and you can respond back intellectually. And this is the message that has to go out. And then when it doesn't, that's why there's an excellent book called Skin in the Game by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and he writes about why the intolerant and intransigent minority always wins, unless the majority says we will not tolerate intolerance anymore.
What is the signal that goes to the common man when Nupur Sharma is suspended for simply stating what is there and to responding back as a normal citizen? That percolates right down till the common man. The
Yeah,
sentiment, the motivation breaks down. That you cannot say this because you're not going to be supported by a supposedly Hindu party when you say these things. So, what is the way out, and how do we make sense of it, and how do we continue this debate? Because by doing this, they're shut down the option of even debating Prophet Muhammad, who is, I think, greater
right,
than Allah also. So, I mean, you say
right,
anything against him and they go berserk. Allah will not, you can say anything about Allah. So,
exactly. So I think the problem you mentioned is a genuine one, right? So what this is doing is this is shutting down any debate, any discourse. Okay, so now the only one which is allowed is the whitewashed narrative that the leftists and Islamists have manufactured, and people should now repeat only that. Okay, that is terrible for any civilization, and particularly India and her Hindu civilization, right? And then, uh, but taking a step back, right? And I think an ordinary Hindu has every is completely justified in feeling let down. Okay, so Nupur Sharma spoke the truth, and she has been thrown under the bus. Okay, but again, this is where Hindus also need to take a step back and look at the big picture. Okay, just that a day or two prior to that, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar was in Europe, right, and the responses he gave completely went viral because he was calling out the white supremacy. He didn't use the word white supremacy, but that was well understood of NATO and all the European countries and America in general. And then he said effectively he refused to budge. Right? He said India will not toe the American line. Okay, India will do things in her own interests by balancing against values and practicality. That's what we'll do. Okay, so if you look at it, for Indian economy, hydrocarbon fuels are very critical. Okay, so because your economy can crash, your economy can boom, or it can go into a crawling mode depending on how much we end up paying for these hydrocarbons, right? So if you look at this particular episode, it was on 26th. Nupur Sharma's interview came, but then Qatar and others they started issuing the diplomatic note only on the 6th. Okay, so something happened in those 10 days, right? So, and there was some power, okay, that was telling all these Islamic countries now go and issue a statement, okay, because, and I can hazard a guess. My guesswork is it's the US. Okay, so because US is really annoyed over the fact that India is importing Russian oil. Okay, and India is doing the right thing. Okay, it's needed for Indian economy. India will do that. Okay, and then India is not following the US line in the anti-Ukrainian conflict, which is also perfectly correct. Okay, the Indian stance is correct. Okay, because America has been waging permanent war since World War II, right? And then if the world wants to apply one yardstick to Russia today, they should have applied it to America all these years. They did not. Okay, so India need not become a lickspittle of the biggest thug in the block. Okay, so India has taken the right stand. So basically, what America wants to do is to, um, you know, create enough noise. Okay, and these things mean nothing beyond that. Just create a perception that, hey, now the uh, OIC countries can now bully India. Okay, so they can get a few number of them, and then they made a statement. But I think those statements are uh, they have very short shelf life. Okay, and then because right after that, India has signed long-term contracts and MOUs with Qatar and with Kuwait and all the other countries. So, and India has also doubled the oil import from Russia right after that. So these things, the while they create a lot of perception, a lot of media sound bites, in reality they don't mean much. And from BJP's perspective, uh, you don't want a scenario where your oil supply from OEC countries is you know there's a question mark around that, right? So they had to act out of compulsion. Okay, because the alternative is Indian economy is rebounding after COVID and everything, and then you don't want this to go into a tailspin. Okay, so from that perspective, it is understood. That's why I made a point, right? So it is one thing for a BJP spokesperson to say certain things in a televised debate versus it's for an unaffiliated Hindu to say those things. Okay. So that's where I think one has to be careful.
So how does the common man now continue this debate on a personal level on Twitter or anything? I mean, what is your advice to them to how to
So wherever we do it, right? Wherever we do that, think of it, the censorship has been enforced by social media giants for the last several years. Okay, definitely last 3-4 years. Okay, and then a few execs at Twitter, a few execs at Facebook, or even Google and YouTube can decide we will not allow these forms of criticism. Okay, and then they can straight away block you. Okay, and then they can censor all those things. Okay, so I think there is only one way out. Okay, I think this is something we Hindus should have done for done years ago, but we are late. At least now we should do that, which is uh, abrogate 295 and 153A and make uh, the right to blaspheme a part and parcel of your fundamental right. Okay, and this is time I think it can be done. Okay, so bring it all under free speech. People will listen to that, and then we have to show the same resolve that Yogi Adityanath is showing in UP. Anyone riots, bulldozer comes out. Okay, and then the people are not spared at all, right? Like in Kanpur riots case, people were arrested in less than 24 hours. Okay, so you do that, then the message goes out: the government is not going to tolerate riot, and then for us to prevail, we can only prevail with free speech. That means get rid of 295 and 153. There is no way out of it.
Sir, this Zakir Naik, the Islamist who was expelled from India, I heard him speaking the same words that this Nukul Sharma said, all about that at the young age, he married this his girl of 7, and then it was consummated at age of 9. And when he says something, the the Islam is not is accepting it, but when a Hindu says the same thing, and there's a lot of Allah Ballah and all that, it's very intriguing, that how is
No,
he
that's why.
accepted?
That's
How
why
is
I
he
was
accepted?
mentioning. That's why I was mentioning for Muslims, this is not really a problem. Okay, because in Islam there is no minimum age for marrying a girl. Okay, and then this is written in the Hadiths, and that's why Yasir Qadi, Zakir Naik, and all the others, they have been always saying this, and that itself is not offensive to them. However, the problem is. That a girl who is 6 or 7 could be married off, and uh, you know uh, uh, the marriage is consummated when she's hardly 9, is not something uh, Muslim apologists would discuss publicly, because while it is okay according to Islam, it is not okay according to uh, modern worldviews, right? So that is why they turn it. But in this case, like I was mentioning, I don't think uh, any of the protesters had even listened to those remarks. Okay, because like I said, the modus operandi, starting with Danish cartoon and every one of these things, Charlie Hebdo and everything, is not to discuss the specifics and point out, look, here is what was told, and here is why it is offensive. No, that's not the modus operandi. Modus operandi is instead to whip up hatred and a dog whistle and point out that Muhammad has been insulted. So now we should go and defend his honor. Okay. And in this case, the 10-day gap before all these things started makes me wonder that this was done by a lobby of Pakistani Americans, okay, well coordinated, and in a very well coordinated attack, they started it. That's why you're looking at a 10-day gap.
My question is there legally anything available in our Indian constitution where we can defend ourselves? That the Muslim world is putting up so much of fight, and obviously we are not people of violence. So, what is our recourse? All this intellectual talk is going on at a very small level. This is very meager, but there is a vast population of Hindus who don't even know what's happening. So, what is some? Is there some kind of a recourse, some kind of a way where we can bring about more awareness and defend ourselves?
I'm not a legal person, so I won't be able to answer whether there is any constitutional provision, any legal provision that will allow us to do that. But the main point you touched upon was bringing about awareness. Unfortunately, ever since India became independent, the only portrayal of Islam or Christianity for that reason has been a whitewashed portrayal, right? That was written by the colonial rulers, that was written by leftists, which completely whitewashes those religions, and then attacks everything which is Hindu. Okay, that has been the only portrayal we have been given, and the only way we can change this is by bringing about awareness. And to bring about awareness, we should have free speech. Okay, and free speech to criticize, attack, ridicule other religions. Okay, using intellect, and similarly to propagate everything around Hinduism by the same yardstick. I think I'm not very hopeful of Indian Constitution or its legal procedures. For example, Psychotropic Drugs Act, right? In 1985, everything from cannabis to all the other drugs, where they were all called drugs and then they were banned. Okay, in 1985, there was not even a public discussion, not even a parliamentary discussion. Reagan wanted it, and Rajiv Gandhi enforced it. That's it. It was as simple as that. So even though something like ganja, cannabis, is very, very central in Hinduism, right? And in a lot of Shivji Ka temple in North India, and for that reason, some of the southern temples, there is a tradition of giving prasad which contains ganja. Okay, so but these things were banned, and there was not even much of a discussion. So I'm not very hopeful of constitution providing enough ammunition to Hindus. But the first thing we need to really get rid of is 295 and 153A.
It's from Gireshji, and Gireshji says, where are all young Hindus? Why are they not voicing their opinion? Is this the fundamental problem in bringing up the Hindu way?
Possibly, I think a lot of Hindus are full of apathy, towards everything, right? Not only Hindu religion, but also our culture, our traditions, and all of these things. What you find is a complete apathy. That is a problem. But also, I think it's in the nature of Hinduism, because ours is not a congregational religion, right? We don't have fundamentals and we don't have dogmas. If you take Christianity or Islam, those who are born into those religions are taught those dogmas, and they have to memorize those dogmas by the time they are 5 or 6 years of age, and then that's what is told to them and reinforced in church and mosques every Sunday or Friday respectively, and hence uh, they have a very simplistic worldview, but they carry that worldview with a lot of certitude, okay, which I think is actually harmful. Okay, in contrast, Hinduism, what you have is a set of uh, uh, sanskaras and other traditions that are unique to your grama or to your family or to your jati. Okay, you follow those things, and then when it comes to Siddhanta, when it comes to other adhyatmic practices, it's something you start exploring, right, when you're ready for that. Okay, which is, I think, uh, uh, sign of a healthy religion. So that's why my general stance has always been not to change Hinduism. Okay, not to change Hinduism to become like Abrahamic religion, so that we also now can mobilize forces and we can also come to the street and riot. My stance always has been Hinduism on one hand and Abrahamic religions on the other are not compatible. Okay, ideologically we have to eradicate the ideologies of Christianity and Islam, and then eventually do a garvapsi of those people to Hindu Dharma. And in other words, my stance is don't change Hinduism. Okay, get rid of the two threats to Hinduism.
The two articles, I think 295 and another one, that talks about hurting sentiments being illegal, and is that only for the Muslims and the Christians, or Hindus also can use it?
So
If we
here's the genesis. Here is the genesis of these articles, right? So about 100 years ago, there was a book written by Pandit Lekram. Okay, so it was called Rangila Rasul. Okay, roughly translated, it means playboy prophet. Okay, and it was a mockery and ridicule of Prophet Muhammad of Islam. Okay, so then uh, this brought about violence. Okay, somebody retaliated, a Muslim fanatic retaliated by stabbing and killing Pandit Lekram. Okay, so that time there was a court case, and then the Muslim side pleaded with the British that you don't have blasphemy laws. That's why these things are being written. Okay, so introduce blasphemy laws. So the Brits introduced those mainly to appease the Islamists at that time. Okay, so
Also,
then
sorry to interrupt, but this Rangila Rasool was written in response to one of a very vulgar thing that was written about Sita Mata and this. It was a
correct.
response to that.
Absolutely, right. And then what happened is that the Christian missionaries at that same time were operating all over India, and then they were attacking Hinduism under the guise of reform. Okay, so they went to the British, and then the British administrators then they said, blasphemy is not to be allowed. Okay, causing religious offense is not allowed unless you do it with the intent of reforming. So every time they attack Hinduism, they will say we are doing it with the intent of reforming Hinduism. Okay, so can we play the same game? Probably, I think on paper you can, but I think the entire judicial ecosystem is filled with people who have inherited this colonial legacy. Okay, and then when it comes to they won't even allow a, a reform oriented critique of Christianity or Islam. Okay, they will, because who decides, right? How do you prove the intent? Okay, yet the law itself, the article itself is so laughable because it says the intent to offend sensibilities. How do you prove intent? You cannot. Okay, so it is all left to the whims and fancies of the judge, and we know which way they will interpret these things.
Thank you, Venkatji. And the irony is that it was, a two-way thing, and they enacted this law to please these two minorities. It's so strange.
तो मेरा एक सवाल था, जब नूपुर शर्मा ने ये स्टेटमेंट दिया तो उसके बाद 6 साल के लिए उनको सस्पेंड कर दिया गया। तो इस पे बीजेपी अपने कार्यकर्ताओं के साथ इतना वो क्यों कर रही? मतलब उनको एक तो सस्पेंड भी कर दिए, ऊपर से उसके बाद एफआईआर भी हो गई। और इन लोग जब हमारे देवी देवताओं के नग्न तस्वीरें निकालते हैं, तब उनके ऊपर कोई एक्शन नहीं होता।
Correct. So the quick translation of the question is, Nupur Sharma ji has been suspended and for 6 years from BJP, and FIRs have been filed against her. But whereas when those who mock Hinduism do all these things, no such action is taken. I think it's a very valid question. So in this, so sometimes, right, you have to concede a battle to win the war. Okay, so in today's context, if America is going to activate the OIC countries and block the export of oil to India even for a week or two, that's going to hurt the economy a lot. Okay, I'm once again just entirely speculating, right? And we do not know that was the reason for certain, but I think this is a probable reason why Indian government acted the way it did, and then because otherwise India will be compelled to toe the American line on the Ukraine war. Okay, which again obviously India doesn't want to do. Okay, so my guess is it was done more as a compulsion. Okay, so and but at the same time, somebody from this question should be put forth to somebody from BJP. Okay, so who can answer this question, because I won't be the right person to answer that.
और सर एक और ये पूछना था, क्योंकि कतर के साथ तो इतना वो बड़ा उनका ट्रेड है नहीं, 1 ही बिलियन का तो ट्रेड है और जहाँ तक बात रही ऑयल की, तो ऑयल तो इन लोग कहीं से भी मंगा सकते हैं। कतर तो इतना छोटा सा देश है, तो उससे इतना
So I think the question is, Qatar is such a small country, and then the trade balance is also not very adverse to us. So, why can't we go and buy oil from elsewhere, right? So, see, this was actually not in this context, but the answer that Jaishankar gave in another context is very pertinent, right? So he said, uh, India can. So he said, uh, we go and buy the best oil from anywhere in the market, right? So one, your spot market is always going to be more expensive, number one, right? And then number two, America has also blockaded oil from Iran and Venezuela. Okay, so this is a point that Jaishankar brought up. Okay, that creates a real physical shortage of oil. Okay, in the world today. Okay, so the challenge is not so much of the trade balance between India and Qatar. Okay, so that is something India can easily handle. Okay, but the problem is you do not want a scenario where see, none of these countries, Qatar and UAE and others, are following the American line. Okay, they don't want to. Okay, so but unfortunately, they are so dependent on the US. So sometimes they have to play to the tune, right? So what India would want to avoid is, America fighting from behind the shoulders of these countries and blocking export for a week or so and other things, right? So then that impacts our economy, and that's not a situation you wanted to be in. So I don't think the challenge is so much with Qatar itself, but also there's looking at the bigger picture. There is something called the necklace of diamond strategy India has launched against China, right? So how we can, put a chokehold on China. Okay, India has got no missile bases all the way up to places like Bahrain, Qatar, and other places. So that being the case, uh, at the end of the day, politics is Rajniti is not about just do this. It's not black and white. Sometimes uh, yeah, because there's also these ideas, right, which is a challenge to one border, one road initiative of China, so which is going through all of these countries. So there is a bigger strategy at play here. So sometimes you just uh, get over the problem by indulging in this kind of real politics, which is not ideal, which is definitely let down for Nupur Sharma ji. But then, like I said, sometimes real politics does take over.